with Whitney Prude today from the Faithfully Speaking Toastmaster Club in Rochester, Minnesota. This club has been around for quite some time. I was surprised to see that it had been formed in 1947, and they normally meet at a place called Charter House. And I actually looked up to find this place, Charter House. It seems like an amazing building in downtown Rochester, so maybe Whitney can share a little bit about that. And I was particularly looking forward to speaking with Whitney. She reached out to us and told us a little bit about her dream of becoming a public speaker, and she shared that she was, or she had started a new business. And I thought, wow, there's all sorts of interesting connections here with Toastmasters, and I just wondered how all that kind of fit together. So with that, Whitney, welcome to True Stories from D6.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you today.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I mentioned a little bit about Faithfully Speaking. Tell me about that club.
Yeah, Faithfully Speaking, it's been a very interesting club. So you mentioned that it started back in 1947, which it was a different club previous to being Faithfully Speaking. And Faithfully Speaking was created about 4 or 5 years ago. And so they kind of transferred the same club and then just changed the name a little bit. But the leader of the club, Mary Peters, she had this vision for this Toastmasters club, where she wanted it to be a place where people could come and speak openly about religion. So she had this idea that you could kind of reach out to maybe people who are in different religions, or even priests or pastors that maybe wanted some help with speaking and those kinds of things, that this would be a club where any of those types of people could come, but also people from different religions. And then one other thing that is really cool about this club and the way that she created it was that about 4 times a year, we would have speakers of different religions come in. So we'd have this open house, we'd have this guest speaker, and they would come in and talk about they would talk about their specific religion, but we would have all kinds of different religious people come in and speak about their religions, which was a really unique idea and very cool.
That is fascinating. There's thousands of Toastmaster clubs around the world, and just the very few that I've become familiar with, there's corporate clubs and community clubs, and every one of them seems to have their own culture and their own focus. But I think your club is the first one I've heard of that had sort of that faith-based element to it, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah, it's very unique for sure.
Yeah, the Charter House. That's just I'm wondering if you're actually meeting there right now, or you meet primarily online, or.
Right now we're meeting online. The Charter House was kind of interesting how we actually got into the Charter House, because it's a senior living center.
Mm-hmm.
We had a member, his name was Joe Sharp, and he was living at Charter House, and he would come and join us. I'm not exactly sure how initially we got into Charter House. I wasn't there right when the club got formed, but we actually ended up getting a really cool room within Charter House, and they let us meet there for free because Joe Sharp, who was one of their residents, was coming to our meetings. And so we felt very fortunate that they were willing to, grant us this room and a place that we could join each week. But because of COVID and everything that's happened in the last year, that hasn't been happening. So we have been meeting online. Yep.
Well, that's understandable. Yeah, I just looked at the website and they had just a little snapshot picture of the place, and I thought, wow, what a wonderful looking building. I'm sure there's some history there as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So you had mentioned when you reached out to us that you've been involved with Toastmasters for 3 years. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah. What led you to Toastmasters?
That's a good question. The majority of my life, I have always had this, I don't know, just this feeling that I really wanted to do speaking. I had had opportunities throughout my life growing up, whether it was religious or in school, or I went to pharmacy school and did residency. So there were a lot of opportunities, obviously, to speak there and to stand up and do presentations. But it was always something, in the back of my mind, this little this little voice that made me just really have this desire to at some point be a public speaker. And I don't know where it came from, but it's like I was born with it.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. So when you say public speaker, what sort of public speaking were you thinking about? More inspirational type speaking, or speaking more on a professional level about your career?
The aspect that I always wanted to do and still want to do is inspirational or motivational speaking. That's something that, as I have done speaking throughout my life and putting speeches together and different things, it's almost like I get this idea, or I'll be asked to speak and I get this idea and things kind of come together in my mind, and then this speech just falls out of me. I could sit down and just write my entire speech in 20, 30 minutes and be done with it. And so it was just something, it was always something that I wanted to do, just to be able to stand up and have that impact and share, my thoughts and my inspiration with other people. I do professional speaking, but that's not really my
Right.
long-term goal. It's not, it's not what's fulfilling to me. I really tend to lean towards the motivational speaking.
Yeah, I think those are the various types of speeches I know for myself that are probably the most difficult. If it's a work-related presentation, it's different because you know the content, you know your audience, you know the time frame. It's you're not trying to really motivate anybody. What you're
Right.
doing is trying to deliver content in an understandable way. But with inspirational or motivational speeches, like what we typically hear in our international speech contests every spring, um, the person has spent a lot of time finding a theme which is going to resonate with people, and I think it's very difficult.
Yeah,
Um,
it can be.
yeah. Can you share some of the themes, or maybe a recent speech that you've done that you're
There's,
particularly proud of?
well, my two most recent, and I've actually put these onto a YouTube channel just because I spent so much time putting them together for Toastmasters. I was like, well, I might as well I might as well share them, right? But I have two of my most recent speeches that are speeches that meant a lot to me. The first one being about chronic illness. So I certainly have had a interesting journey with chronic illness, and I dedicated a lot of my life to becoming a pharmacist and working through pharmacy school, getting a doctorate degree, going through residency. I worked so hard to get through these things. And then about 9 months into my first job at the Mayo Clinic, I injured my wrists, and I ended up, 2 months later, just really sick, fatigued, with an autoimmune disease. And so it really changed and altered my life completely. Everything. I used to be really active. I was adventurous. I loved to travel. I loved to play sports and all of these things. And, it's almost like they were all just taken away from me.
Sure.
And so that's kind of what led me to really pushing towards this public speaking, because I had pharmacy, but all of a sudden I had all of these restrictions and I really wasn't able to do my job in the way that I needed to be able to do it. And so I had this huge student loan hanging over my head, and I was like, what, what do I do now? So I always had that thought in the back of my head of public speaking. And I said, if I were to choose a different career, that's absolutely what I would want to do. So that first speech is really about that journey and how my life changed, and about really being able to embrace chronic illness, that yes, my life changed and there's a lot of unfortunate things, but that doesn't mean that I can't be happy and find fulfillment in my life still in a different way.
So in a way, your the point where you're starting is, what do I do now?
Yeah.
Given everything that transpired up to that point, I guess you realize it couldn't continue on that path, but it could, maybe with some modifications it could, but you had to make a decision. Okay, now what do I do?
Yep. What's next?
I think, yeah, what's next? That's an
Yep.
interesting starting point. Yeah.
Yep.
It's definitely in the middle of some kind of journey, right? There's a path to there, there's
Absolutely.
a forward path as well. So
Right.
who was your audience with that speech?
It was Faithfully Speaking,
Oh, okay, at the club.
Toastmasters. Yep. So I had prepared that. I mean, now it's anyone on on
Right.
YouTube that finds me and wants to listen to it, but I prepared that speech for Faithfully Speaking Toastmasters. And one other one that I recently have done, I called it the power to choose, I believe.
Okay.
And that one of my favorite quotes, and I talk about this quite a lot actually in a lot of the things that I speak about, but it's by Viktor Frankl. He was I'm sure you're familiar with him. He wrote Man's Search for Meaning, spent a lot of years in a concentration camp, but one of his quotes, now I've got to think about what the quote is. Between stimulus and response, there's a space, and in that space is our power to choose. And a lot of, even now, I have a wellness coaching business, and even now I focus a lot on that fact that between stimulus and response, right, we have within our minds, we have all these reactions, these thoughts that just come into our mind, and then we have emotions that come from those thoughts, and then we just react. And a lot of times we're not aware of all of these processes, and that there's actually a space in there, and that we as humans with our complex brains, we have the ability to pause and to think about what's happening, and then how we can respond to those things that are happening.
Yeah, I love that quote too. I read that book, I would say probably 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I remember being impressed at the time, such a grandiose title, and it wasn't a very long book either,
Right.
but just recently in something I was reading, I came across that quote again, and it's one of those quotes that stops you and forces you to think a little bit.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's a lot of depth to it if you take the time to think about it.
absolutely. So you mentioned your business, your healthcare coach, is it, or
Yep, a health and wellness coach.
health and
Yep.
wellness coach?
Yep.
And so you would work with others in that are dealing with chronic illnesses, or?
Yeah, so I don't specifically focus on chronic illness. However, I certainly do work with a lot of people who do have chronic illnesses. But the
Okay.
interesting thing about coaching is that it's very much, and the reason that I enjoy it so much is it's very much a partnership with, you're working with a client. It's different than like going and meeting with a therapist or a doctor where you kind of expect them to be the expert. You come in and you sit down and you want to know, what's wrong, and what do you tell me exactly what I need to do to fix it. Right.
Right.
And even still, when we get told what we're supposed to do to fix it, then we leave the doctor and we're like, I'm not doing that. Right. But the beauty of coaching is really that as a coach, I reverse the role, right? So the client then becomes the expert because they're the expert in their own life. And so through, asking certain questions and using some different techniques through coaching, it really is very thought-provoking, and they're able to generate a lot of ideas and come up with a lot of their own solutions and things that they've never thought about before. It's like these aha moments where you just it finally clicks and you get it, and you find ways that you can move yourself forward in your own life. And when people can find those own solutions for themselves and the meaning behind those solutions, they're significantly more likely to stick with them and to be successful with the things that they want to achieve.
Oh, that's great. That's a fascinating business that you've started there. So with Toastmasters, just I guess in your own words, how has Toastmasters helped you in helping you achieve your goal of becoming a public speaker and becoming in this case, healthcare and wellness coach? How has it
Yeah.
helped you in those two goals that you've had?
Yeah. Well, I guess when I think about Toastmasters, and starting Toastmasters, I oftentimes go back to the very beginning of when I very first, talked myself into going to Toastmasters. And a lot of this is intertwined with my health, right? My health is really what pushed me to say, I've got to do something else.
Mhm.
And I remember my very first meeting of Toastmasters that I went to, I was very, very sick. And I was having some sort of a dispute with my boyfriend, and I was in tears, and it was a miserable day. It was an awful day. And I had this Toastmasters meeting that I just wanted to go to, and I was determined to go to it. So big, puffy red eyes. I was like, I'm going, right? I show up to this Toastmasters meeting, and it was Dave Pearson that was there. It was an evaluations Toastmasters meeting. And he sat down with me after the meeting, and he just, he really took me through what Toastmasters is and the different clubs that are available and the different times, and really walked me through a lot of those things. And that's how I really came to faithfully speaking. But it was a very rough road to begin with, and to really just push myself to get started. It wasn't easy for me by any means. But when I started in Toastmasters, I thought, I've had a lot of experience with speaking in front of people. But when I prepared my first speech, the first speech is always an icebreaker speech. And I prepared my first speech, and I stood up there, and I was ready, and I felt like it was such an impactful speech, and I was just excited to share about my story. And I was so nervous, and I was talking really, really fast. And there were so many things that after I received my own evaluations on that speech, I was like, man, there's a lot more to this than what I've done, right? Standing in front of someone and giving a pharmacy speech where I'm looking at a PowerPoint, and you can rush through all of these scientific topics and different things. I just realized that, actually standing up and public speaking with no props, no support, and it's just you, and it's your voice, and it's how you use your body and your movements and different things like that. There is so much more to it.
Right. It's so valuable to get that kind of feedback from everyone, and I think we get better at evaluating over time, where
Yeah. Yeah.
we can maybe suggest one thing that the person might want to focus on, and leave them in a place where they're motivated to do another speech, right? You don't
Right.
want them to give up, but well, great. Well, Whitney, you've certainly shared a lot, and I certainly appreciate that. I always like to end these interviews with asking if you would do a message to, well, first of all, to people in District 6 in other Toastmaster Club. We have a huge district in Minnesota, but for those in the district that are listening to this interview, what would you say to that person? And then perhaps that person that's maybe thinking about Toastmasters like you 3 years ago, but it's kind of on the wire, not sure what to do. So I wonder if you could give a message to all of us as to what
Sure.
what encourage us.
Sure. The thing that I think about with Toastmasters, and when people are thinking about Toastmasters, it's always uncomfortable to start getting up in front of people and speaking. And it's something that makes a lot of people very nervous, and you're putting yourself on the spot. It's maybe brings out some insecurities. So, people are really, really hesitant to take that step to really invest in Toastmasters and invest in themselves and get up in front of people and to start learning and start growing. And it's scary to get up there and then to have everyone evaluating you and, telling you the things that you can improve on. But the reality is that Toastmasters is really designed to help you succeed. And So I guess my message in terms of Toastmasters and, you know, the difference that it's made for me, I never imagined that within 3 years of being in Toastmasters that I would go from being a very, very nervous, inexperienced speaker to really being able to stand in front of people and to be confident in myself and in what I have to say and in my abilities to be able to share my message with people. And if you really put in the time and the effort into Toastmasters, the system works. It really does. And it's encouraging. It's not something to be afraid of. I remember my first several speeches, I received so much praise, and in the back of my mind, I'm like, it couldn't have been that good. But the reality is that sometimes in the beginning, you need that praise, right? You need that encouragement to help to move you forward. And so when I think about my journey with Toastmasters, I would say that if you have a dream or you have a goal or something that you want to achieve, it is absolutely 100% possible. I think about, you know, my limitations with my health, and that, yes, I have to move slower with a lot of things because I don't have, you know, the capabilities that I used to have. But it's absolutely still possible for me to move myself forward and to achieve, you know, that dream that I always had to be a public speaker. So I would certainly encourage people to, you know, take that step, even though it's scary. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised that you really can get yourself where you want to go. And Toastmasters has all the tools to be able to help you get there.
Oh, that's great. So Toastmasters is a place where that can help you reach your dreams.
Absolutely.
I like the way you phrased that there. All right. Well, Whitney, thank you so much. And it was great talking with you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was nice talking to you too.
Sure.